David Clayton is the non-executive director at Solar Archive, and he's going to look at what constitutes value to shareholders and how you can best influence it and manage service providers setting to keep capital flowing into your business. By examining factors such as P&L, which we heard about a little bit earlier, ROI, cash management, he defines key drivers behind shareholder value and growth. I'd like to ask now a big CloudFest welcome for David Clayton, who's going to share his wisdom on growth and shareholder value growth with us right now. David, please come and join me on stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm acutely aware that I'm the only person that stands between you and lunch, and therefore I feel I have a big responsibility to try and make this interesting, but also to skip it along and to talk a little bit about a topic that's very close to my heart, and it's about building value within companies and organizations. And given we're here at CloudFest, I wanted to focus a little bit around managed service providers and, again, building value for your companies. I'm then also going to finish up. I'm here representing Solar Archive, that I'll talk a little bit about later. I'm just going to pick one example of how you might apply some of the theory I'm going to talk about in practice to building value for your company. I was told many years ago, early on in my career, that there's two things that people don't want to hear about. One is you or your company. I'm now going to break that rule because I felt I needed to try and establish a little bit my credentials as to why I feel I'm qualified to talk a little bit about shareholder value. My career has really always spanned the technology industry, going right back to the 70s as a COBOL and ALGOL programmer, believe it or not. I spent a very interesting 10 years in investment banking, around Credit Suisse First Boston, as it was then, the technology group. And I then moved back into industry, running strategy and M&A for Sage, a small business accounting software company I'm sure many of you will have heard of. I find it particularly interesting to be here at CloudFest because during my time at Sage, we looked very closely at moving into the hosting business because the SME markets were actually quite similar. And indeed, I met on a number of occasions a company called Intergenia. I then met a company called Host Europe, and I then met a company called GoDaddy. So it's quite interesting that I should find myself here. The other thing that struck me about being here at CloudFest, this is actually the first time I've been here, and over my nearly 40 years in the industry, I would say this is the finest event I've actually ever attended. I've never come across a group of people so passionate about their business, so knowledgeable, and so open and willing to share. And I find that particularly interesting when I talk about building value, because we all operate in a market that is dominated, apparently, by behemoths that span our industry. Whether that be Microsoft, whether that be Google, whether that be Amazon, we're all facing competition and threats from those companies every day. And it made me think last night, why on earth are people bothering? How can you possibly compete? But I have seen during the course of the last few days at this conference some unbelievably outstanding technologies that actually stretch far beyond the capabilities of those three apparent market leaders. And I come away from this event feeling incredibly encouraged by the opportunities to build value. So what is shareholder value? I heard David talking earlier about the old world, the new world, the focus on profits. Value is not simply a function of profits. It's a function of growth. It's also a function, actually, of free cash flow. So looking at actually how you're deploying capital, especially at a time when the cost of capital is as low as it's been, certainly in my lifetime, the generation of cash flow becomes absolutely critical. But also we need to recognize what is the intrinsic value of any company. It's net assets, the physical assets you own. In the case of a software business, that might be intellectual property. And it's the net present value of the future cash flows that your business can generate. And clearly, if you are flatlining, if you are failing to grow, then you're not going to be generating and maximizing value for the owners of your business, be that yourself or be the providers of external capital. So the growth in free cash flow becomes absolutely critical. So how do we go about increasing shareholder value? Well, we can clearly increase revenues. We can increase revenues by selling new services to our existing customers, or indeed by winning new customers. We can leverage the assets that we own, and those assets may be physical, but they may also be intellectual property. They may also be people. We need to actually increase average revenue per customer through adding new solutions. We need to increase free cash flow, but most importantly, we need to find mechanisms for retaining the customers that we have spent years acquiring and spending a lot of money acquiring those customers. So the reduction of churn in that customer base becomes absolutely critical. But in the end, it's about increasing the return on the capital that we invest in our business. So what assets would you consider our cloud MS managed service provider is actually trying to leverage? Well, there's obviously the physical infrastructure, but for an increasing number, and I've seen here, of managed services providers, they're looking to see how they also acquire their own intellectual property, a key asset that we're looking to generate returns from. I think the second most important asset is undoubtedly the people that you have. It's undoubtedly the talent that they bring. It's the orientation towards managing customer relationships, another topic I know we've been talking about earlier, that becomes critical. It's about the brand that you have. It's about distribution and access to your chosen markets, and fundamentally it's about the customers that you serve. I also think that within this potentially crowded marketplace, it's important to stand out. And the best managed service providers, the ones generating the greatest value, are highly recognizable for their differentiated qualities. They are probably the people who have the most reliable, trustworthy infrastructure. They certainly have the best people and the greatest talent, but people who are orientated to serve their customer. So it's not just about pure technology credentials, it's about understanding the customer needs and ensuring that they're delivered to. It's about a brand that is known for something specific within your market. Why would I go to this company versus that company? It's because I know that they have a track record in solving my particular problem. It needs the best access to its defined markets, and that access can be through your own sales operations, but it can also be through a network of partners. But market access is something that is often neglected. People believe that business will find them. My experience is that's not really the case. The cost of customer acquisition is again another metric that needs to be analyzed carefully for a managed service provider. It's been particularly analyzed mainly in the software world. Software service providers tend to get valued not only on the lifetime value of a customer, but also on the cost of customer acquisition. I was looking at a company not long ago called Constant Contact that was acquired by Endurance. Constant Contact was a very successful small business email marketing company, but in the end their value was constrained by the fact that they were paying too much to acquire their customers relative to the lifetime value of those customers. I wonder whether within the managed service provider world, people focus enough attention on how much they're paying to acquire their customers. I particularly find this within our business at the moment, that actually acquiring new customers is the hardest part. We're operating in a world where risk is at a high level, and consequently changing vendor tends to be the last thing on customers' mind. Therefore, I would argue the best way to build value is to leverage the customers you already own rather than overpaying to necessarily acquire new customers. So if we're going to actually leverage those customer assets, What we then need to do is have a growing average revenue per those average customers and ensure that they stay with us, that we have the lowest possible customer churn. So taking the two things together, being a differentiated managed service provider, then customers need to know who you are, but you need to know who they are and what it is those customers need. So customers actually do want to understand what your differentiation is, but they also want to know that the services you're carrying are the best in class. Managing customer transition to the cloud is about those customers giving responsibility to their key managed service providers to help them choose best-in-class applications and solutions. For many customers, these are mission-critical business applications, and they trust their service providers to advise and support them on those mission-critical applications. They need to help customers achieve necessary regulatory compliance. That means that they understand where their data's held, that they understand how the data's held, and that they understand that they can find that data when they need it. I think it's also important, and listening to the last presentation, and when you start to think about the value in data and the earlier comments about big data, I think it's a critical opportunity for managed service providers managing customer data, not only to store it, manage it, archive it, but also to help those customers turn that data into information. And whether that be under the heading of artificial intelligence, or whether that be purely a tool for turning that data into information, I believe that managed service providers need to increasingly look at value that they have within their customers' data. You know, I find it quite interesting to think about email. Email, I believe, is still an absolutely mission-critical application, and basically, I think for many managed service providers, hanging on to the email customer is increasingly important. But of course, if you're going to manage email, you actually need to archive that email, in my humble opinion. And the value that email archiving brings to building shareholder value is that it helps managed service providers increase revenues because it's an additional service that can be offered. It helps them leverage their assets. It fully utilizes the infrastructure, the talent, the people. It increases average revenue per customer. It helps increase free cash flow, assuming that you have the right understanding of the pricing model here. It can help you reduce customer churn, and ultimately it can help increase return on invested capital. The email market is actually, I think, underregarded and underrated in terms of its potential. The key statistic on this slide is that a quite staggering 60% of all business critical information is only stored in email. It is still the most common business communication mechanism. And if you think that for your customers, 60% of their business critical information is only in email, you would think nothing more than you must be managing their email relationship to ensure that you retain those customers. We have found that some 3/4 of companies in the world have at some point been required through a legal action to actually submit emails as part of an e-discovery process. For many companies, that can be an incredibly costly experience. Many companies do not have highly scalable, searchable, flexible email archiving solutions, and as a result, whether it comes through a legal request or whether it comes from a freedom of information request, the delivery of emails can be a time-consuming and costly experience. Of course, we hear about GDPR every day just at the moment, but the regulatory environment is more and more requiring a more controlled management of email. That doesn't necessarily mean retention. I'm increasingly finding customers saying, actually, what I don't want to do to help me manage my GDPR requirements is to retain all my emails. The critical point, I would say, is that it's critical that you understand what it is you have got and why you have it. And that's really what customers are looking for from their managed service providers. A typical business user manages over 130 emails a day. I'm sure many of you are thinking, I wish it was only 130 emails per day. There are expected to be 120 million Office 365 accounts by the end of 2018, and I would think that for many of you, the threat that's coming from Microsoft as they drive their customers towards Office 365 is probably a major concern that you have in terms of achieving the objective of retaining your customers and certainly their email relationship with you. The email archiving market is expected to be roughly $5 billion of revenue, and it's a market that's growing mid-double digits, so around 14% per annum. So the opportunity for managed service providers is to use email archiving to help increase your customer retention. It's obviously an additional feature for you to sell. It will actually reduce the amount of customer churn because you're managing data, and it will actually become a valuable, flexible business tool that will embed your services more closely to your customers. Obviously, it will be a revenue opportunity for you. It will actually be an opportunity for you to start to build services on the data you are managing on behalf of your customers. So the one slide that I have on my company, having talked about the need to differentiate, a couple of words about Solar Archive. We're a new company. I'm an investor in this business. I chair the board of this business. I'm a founder of this business. So I certainly understand about how to build value, and I have very focused on building value within Solar Archive. But our chosen decision, we have a long history in email archiving. However, we have never gone to market through managed service providers. We have created this product exclusively to build partnerships with managed service providers. The product is highly scalable. We can manage configurations from a handful of users across potentially tens of thousands, if not millions of customers. We can also manage single customers with many hundreds of thousands of users. It's agnostic with respect to the infrastructure and the email products that you use. It can be white labeled at many levels, so it can be white labeled to your brand at the top level, but indeed if you sell through partners yourself, it can be sub-branded at lower levels. It can increase your speed to market with a solution. We could have a customer, a partner up and running on Solar Archive with their brand in a matter of weeks. I hope you'll take the opportunity to come and visit us during the course of the event. I hope you'll see why email archiving is an important addition to delivering shareholder value, and I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. David Clayton, ladies and gentlemen. David, a couple of questions, a couple of observations to start with. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
The things I noted down, and in reverse order that we heard them, email, 60% of a company's information, and that's mission critical, business critical information, is contained in email, and we think email is a non-mission critical service. That was a fascinating insight for us all, and that's where the value lies in helping our customers and partners to protect their customers' email. Fabulous insight. The other fact point I liked was acquiring new customers is the hard part. That's so overlooked in our industry because we're so focused on the how with the technology and not the why with growth. Great insight. But I have a question. You had a slide there around the best MSPs, and a lot of these people in the room are making that journey towards becoming MSP from a pure standard hosting service provider to a managed service provider. What are the three key challenges you see in becoming a successful MSP?
Well, one comes back to distribution. It's how do I find the customers that are right for me?
Okay.
And sometimes that's geographic. The easiest way is, of course, to access the people who are nearest to you. But I think increasingly it's about differentiation. So it's about saying which are the vertical market specializations I focus in. I think it's very hard at the scale many hosting providers moving to MSPs become is scale. I can't be everything to everybody. So focus on the applications where you're differentiated, I would argue, is the key area.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, because a hoster sees themselves as offering a generic platform, and that avoids the decision of what am I not going to focus on when we go to specialization. Very good. One more question then. What would be, to become that successful MSP, what would be the 3 key success factors you'd look for in a business that would tell you those indicators that they're going to make that transformation?
It's a good question. One is brand. In other words, show me the customers that you've got. And I think when I meet managed service providers, if I see that they've got customers from every industry, I keep saying, well, why would I partner with this company rather than another company? So look at the customers. Talk about your customers. Talk about case studies. Why do people use your customers at the moment? I would say quality of infrastructure. Again, I know we've been trying to sort of steer the conversation purely away from technology, but actually the quality of the infrastructure that you've got becomes terribly important, because ultimately reliability of service becomes a key critical success factor. And I think the third thing is what are your particular skill sets and knowledge around the applications you're going to be delivering for me as the customer? And that comes down to people skills as well. So the quality of the people.
Very good. So we had brand, we had that customer, the brand position was validated by that rich customer base. We had the quality of technology and the quality of people.
Yeah.
Wow. It sounds so simple. David Clayton, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David Clayton, ladies and gentlemen, the non-executive director at Solar Archive.